Hi everyone, my name is Kendra Benedict and I did my research paper on medical interpreting, what it's all about, and I am here tonight being interviewed to kind of cover anything that I missed and go over what my paper was. So, yeah.
Kendra, what exactly made you choose medical interpreting as your research topic?
Well, over the summer I read this book called The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down by Anne Fadiman, and it's about this um, little girl who has epilepsy and her parents only speak Hmong and she is too young to talk. And it's all about the culture clash between the doctors and her parents and the language barrier that exists between them. And I wanted to understand more about what happens in hospitals when the two people don't understand each other.
Hmm. And so this girl and her parents, um, they came across issues which you thought were could be researched more into.
Yeah, I just wanted to know more about medical interpreting and what hospitals do to make sure that patients understand what doctors are saying and that doctors can understand and sympathize with their patients. And I think it's a really big issue in the US, especially since we have so many immigrants and so many people who speak a different language. I mean, even here in Madison, there's a huge population of Hmong and Mexican Americans who might need interpreting in a hospital.
Okay. So, who is Chuck Benedict? You talked about him a lot, and he seemed to have a lot of experiences in, for example, Japan. Um, so, who is he?
He's actually my dad. um, but yeah, he had a lot of experiences in other countries and having to seek medical care where he didn't know the language. So I thought he had a lot of interesting stories about how that happened, and I wanted to share them in my paper.
Okay. So, why would a hospital not necessarily provide an interpreter for patients who need care?
Um, After my research, I believe the biggest or even only reason they wouldn't is because of cost. Um, there was one study that I found that if you provide like trained professional medical interpreters, it costs about $79 per interpretation, which depending on where that is could add up to a lot of money. So that could be a reason. Also, depending on the availability of what languages are spoken in that area, who knows how available interpreters are who speak that language as well.
Okay. So, are interpreters actually proven to be more helpful than, say, a family member who accompanies a patient, for example?
Yeah, actually they are. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they're trained to interpret medically, so they understand um, American medical terminology or English medical terminology, as well as they have extensive training in speaking in different linguistics to accommodate different levels of education and different cultures, etc. And um, patients were proven to have a higher satisfaction rate with medical interpreters as opposed to someone who they brought with them, like a family member or a friend, or also ad hoc interpreters, which are, I guess, untrained medical interpreters. They also had a pretty low satisfaction rate compared to trained medical interpreters.
Okay, so how does one become an interpreter to work in a hospital, for example?
Um, so a lot of hospitals have bilingual interpreters or bilingual healthcare workers that do most of the interpreting, but they're not necessarily trained. So to become a trained medical interpreter, there are various courses, and Madison College actually offers a few courses to become certified. So yeah, there are programs where you can get a certification stamp.
Okay, so that sounds. They seem pretty um, involved in their work. But so, what's wrong with a hospital staff doing the work that an interpreter would do?
The only issue would be if they're solely bilingual and they don't necessarily, so they can talk really well in both languages, but when it comes to interpreting things like gallbladder or other medical terminology that they might not know in the other words, then like miscommunications can happen, and that's where the big issues arise.
Okay, so what exactly does an interpreter have to do besides, obviously interpreting? Is there specific, um, they have to like filter out information or relay information to the doctor and or patient to,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know what I mean? Like, what do they exactly have to do?
Yeah, so they obviously have to interpret and be honest and truthful, but they also, I found that they do a lot of sifting through unnecessary things. Like a patient may want to describe their whole morning to them, which they might not necessarily have time to convey the whole story to the doctor or nurse or whatever. So they do a lot of sifting. They also have to be able to accommodate different dialects. So, speaking to someone who might not have the same knowledge of vocabulary as the medical professional, so they might have to change, like, I don't know, small intestine to your gut, for instance.
Mm-hmm. More of like a layman's language.
Yeah, but they also, a lot of hospitals have them, like, translating pamphlets and stuff when they're not doing person-to-person interpretations.
Okay. So one last question: how do they make sure that they have every language um, available for any potential patient? Some languages aren't spoken as widely as others, but how does a hospital make sure that that every patient could be accommodated for?
So first of all, they only hospitals that receive federal funding of any kind, partially or fully, they're the only ones that are required to provide medical interpreters. But as far as making sure that all the languages are present, they so if they're required to provide medical interpreters, they're required to provide based on the ratio of the population. So if there's some Hmong, some Spanish, then they have to have Hmong and Spanish on staff. But they also use telephone interpreters a lot for languages that might show up.
Okay, so for like the occasional, language that's, for example, maybe someone's touring, the country, and they're happen to be speaking a language and only that language that no one really does around here. So would they then have to contact a third party for that service?
Yeah, then they would. I mean, if they don't have someone on staff that speaks that language and they have to provide an interpretation, then they would call in a telephone interpreter who's also trained to interpret medically, typically.
That's very interesting. I think we'll get things wrapped up here. Do you have any last comments or things you wish to say about your research paper? Maybe something people didn't read about in your paper that you'd like to say now?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you.